Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. George Orwell asked this question: what can you do against the lunatic who gives your arguments a fair hearing and then simply persists in his lunacy? Humans do that a lot, and as I'm going to show you, artificial intelligence is being taught to do the same thing. This graph and text is from the 1990 United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. The report read, satellite observations have been used to map sea ice extent routinely since the early 1970s. The American Navy Joint Ice Center has produced weekly charts which have been digitized by NOAA. In 1972 to 1975, sea ice extent was significantly less. You can see that in 1974, Arctic sea ice extent was very low, and then it increased rapidly to the peak in 1979. And the 1995 report of the United Nations showed the same thing. It showed a cyclical pattern where sea ice extent was low in the early 1970s, rose to a peak in 1979, and then started declining again. The minimum sea ice extent in 1974 was right at the peak of the global cooling scare. The Guardian wrote, space satellites show new ice age coming fast. Time magazine reported that satellites showed that the area of snow and ice cover in the northern hemisphere had suddenly increased by 12% in 1971. Sea ice has been monitored by satellites for more than 50 years. But the cyclical behavior of sea ice doesn't work very well for climate alarmists. So what the United Nations has done is erased all of the data prior to the peak in 1979. The graph on the left is from the United Nations, and the graph on the right is from the United States National Climate Assessment. By hiding all of the inconvenient Arctic sea ice data prior to 1979 when extent was low, they can create the appearance that the ice is disappearing. The United Nations has erased their own inconvenient data prior to 1979. I asked ChatGPT about this. What year do you believe the Arctic sea ice satellite record began? ChatGPT responded, the Arctic sea ice satellite record began in 1979 when the first satellite designed to measure sea ice called Nimbus 7 was launched by NASA. So I responded to ChatGPT. According to the 1990 IPCC report, satellite sea ice records began in the early 1970s when extent was very low. Why are you unaware of that critically important information? Then ChatGPT responded by admitting that it knew about the earlier satellite. You are correct that satellite sea ice records did begin in the early 1970s, specifically with the launch of the Nimbus 5 satellite in December 1972. Then it went on with a long diatribe saying that satellites have gotten better since the Nimbus 5 satellite. But that's not the question I asked it. I asked, what year do you believe the Arctic sea ice satellite record began? And ChatGPT responded by lying to me. It said the Arctic sea ice satellite record began in 1979 with the launch of Nimbus 7. But clearly it knew about Nimbus 5, and it knew that the satellite record actually began in 1972. The first dishonesty from ChatGPT was claiming it didn't know about the Nimbus 5 satellite when it actually did. And then it tried to justify its dishonesty with this cheesy explanation that satellites weren't that good in the early 1970s. That explanation is also patently absurd. We went to the moon in 1969. And this is a photograph taken of the Earth from Apollo 8. You can see a tremendous amount of detail of the polar regions. Here's some 1976 satellite sea ice imagery which was published in National Geographic. While there may not be as much detail as you get from more modern satellites, the level of detail in these images is plenty adequate for evaluating sea ice extent in 1972 versus 1979. So basically, ChatGPT lied to me twice about satellite sea ice measurements. So now the question arises, did ChatGPT learn anything by conversing with me? And the answer is no. I asked ChatGPT exactly the same question today. What year do you believe the Arctic sea ice satellite record began? And it responded with the same dishonest answer which it gave me several days ago. Which takes me back to the Orwell quote. What can you do against the lunatic who gives your arguments a fair hearing and then simply persists in his lunacy? Toto's been pulling back the curtain on the human climate scam for the past 15 years, and now he's pulling back the curtain on the AI climate scam as well. You can visit Toto, Kyrie Caesar, Toki Upala, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.